She accidentally goes into heat after inhaling human pheromones, and her body starts changing. The scorching twin suns beat down mercilessly on the barren landscape of Proxima Centauri 4, a desolate frontier world that most sentient beings avoided like the plague. Not Staff Sergeant Jake Harrison. The muscular human stood at the perimeter fence of Outpost Dune, his powerful arms exposed to the elements as he patrolled in his heavy-duty yellow exosuit. The armor's cooling system struggled against the planet's punishing heat, but Jake had long since grown accustomed to the discomfort. Another thrilling day in paradise, he muttered to himself, running a hand through his tousled light brown hair as he scanned the horizon with hazel eyes that matched the desert's caramel hues. Outpost Dune was the Terran Confederacy's most remote extraction facility, mining the rare element proxy from the planet's crust. The precious resource powered the faster-than-light drives that kept humanity competitive in the galactic economy. It also made the outpost a prime target for the indigenous Skarn raiders, who viewed the mining operation as a desecration of their ancestral lands. Jake checked his pulse rifle's charge and adjusted the targeting system on his helmet. 3 weeks had passed since the last Skarn attack. They were overdue. His stubble jaw clenched as he remembered the last raid. 2 good men lost, equipment damaged, and production halted for days. Not on his watch. Not again. Harrison. The voice of Lieutenant Commander Briggs crackled through his comm. Get your ass to the landing pad. Federation inspection team arriving in 20 minutes. Jake suppressed a groan. Copy that, sir. En route. Federation inspections were bureaucratic nightmares that inevitably resulted in more paperwork and tighter restrictions. The last thing they needed was some pencil-pushing diplomat telling them how to run a frontier outpost while the Skarn were planning their next attack. As he trudged toward the landing pad, the distant whine of approaching engines grew louder. The sleek diplomatic shuttle descended through the atmosphere, its polished hull reflecting the harsh sunlight. Jake positioned himself at attention, his exosuit's servos whirring as he straightened his posture. The shuttle's landing ramp extended with a pneumatic hiss, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Federation representative who emerged was unlike any diplomat he'd encountered before. Her skin was a vibrant emerald green that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, contrasting beautifully with cascading silver hair that reached her waist. Her figure was elegant and lithe, moving with a grace that seemed impossible in the planet's high gravity. Ambassador Eola Vyxan, Federation Diplomatic Corps, she announced, her voice melodic yet authoritative as she approached. Her large blue eyes surveyed the outpost critically before settling on Jake. I presume you're my escort? Jake cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the sweat beading on his forehead. Staff Sergeant Jake Harrison, ma'am. Security Chief. Welcome to Outpost Dune. Sergeant Harrison, she acknowledged with a slight nod. I've been dispatched to evaluate this facility's compliance with the Proxima Treaty. The Federation has received concerning reports about environmental impact and indigenous relations. Jake fought to keep his expression neutral. We maintain the highest standards here, Ambassador. I'd be happy to show you around. As they walked toward the main compound, Jake noticed Eola's steps faltering slightly. She inhaled deeply, her chest rising as she took in a long breath near him. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating rapidly. Ambassador, are you all right? Jake asked, concerned by her sudden change in demeanor. Eola's hand flew to her throat, her breathing becoming shallow. Jake, I feel strange. Her voice trembled as she looked at him with confusion. Your scent, it's triggering something in me. Before Jake could respond, he noticed subtle changes occurring in her appearance. Her already shapely figure seemed to become more pronounced, curves becoming fuller and more sensual. A flush spread across her emerald skin, and her silver hair seemed to take on an almost luminescent quality. Ambassador Vyxan. Jake stepped closer, genuinely concerned. She backed away, her hands trembling. I need to explain something quickly. My species, the Vyxans, we have a biological response to certain chemical signatures. Her voice was strained, as if each word required effort. It seems your pheromones have triggered my mating cycle. Jake's eyes widened in shock. Your what? My mating cycle, she repeated, embarrassment evident in her voice. It's a physiological response that occurs when we encounter compatible genetic markers. It's not supposed to happen with humans. This is unprecedented. Jake felt a wave of responsibility crash over him. Whatever was happening to her was because of him, however unintentional. What can I do to help? I need to contact my ship, Eola said, struggling to maintain her composure. There are suppressants, medications that can help manage the symptoms. As they hurried toward the communication center, Jake couldn't help but notice the stares from other personnel. Iola's transformation was becoming more pronounced with each passing minute, her body adapting in ways that seemed designed to attract a mate, specifically him. "This is highly irregular," Iola whispered as they entered the comm center. "I'm a senior diplomat. If word gets back to the Federation Council that I've entered a mating cycle because of a human, your secret's safe with me," Jake assured her, activating the secured channel to her ship. "We'll figure this out." As Iola spoke urgently with her ship's medical officer, Jake found himself in an impossible situation. He was responsible for the safety of both the outpost and now this diplomat, whose body was undergoing unpredictable changes because of his mere presence. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, the Skarn were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Jake Harrison had faced down raiders, survived dust storms, and repelled numerous attacks, but nothing in his military training had prepared him for this diplomatic and biological crisis. As Iola ended her communication, her expression was grim. "Bad news?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "The suppressants won't work once the cycle has begun," she confirmed, "and my ship can't retrieve me for at least 3 days due to a solar storm affecting orbital approaches." Jake nodded grimly. "Then we'll just have to manage until then." Little did either of them know that managing would be the least of their concerns in the days to come. "Try to focus on your breathing," Jake suggested as he escorted Iola to the guest quarters. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The ambassador shot him an icy glare that could have frozen the desert outside. "I'm a senior Federation diplomat with 15 years of crisis negotiation experience. I think I can manage my own breathing techniques, Surgeon." Despite her sharp tone, Jake noticed her hands trembling as she punched in the access code he provided. Her normally graceful movements had become jerky, almost frantic, as she fought against her body's biological imperatives. "Fair enough," he conceded, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'll have meals sent directly to your quarters if you prefer to remain isolated." Iola paused at the doorway, her blue eyes softening slightly. "I apologize for my curtness. This situation is, unprecedented. My species mating cycles are typically triggered only by compatible Vyxan males. There's no record of a human causing this response." Jake nodded, trying to keep his eyes fixed on her face and not the increasingly pronounced curves of her body. "Maybe your medical officer could run some tests, figure out what's causing the cross-species reaction." "An excellent suggestion," she agreed, visibly relieved to approach the problem analytically. "I'll need samples from you, blood, saliva, skin cells, with your consent, of course." "Whatever helps," Jake said. "I feel responsible for putting you in this position." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Hardly your fault, Surgeon. You didn't exactly engineer your pheromones to disrupt my biological functions." Her expression turned serious again. "Though I must ask you to keep this matter confidential. If the Federation Council learned that one of their senior diplomats was compromised in this manner, it could undermine my authority and the inspection's integrity." "Understood. As far as anyone else is concerned, you're just conducting a routine evaluation." As Jake turned to leave, Iola called after him. "Surgeon Harrison, thank you for your discretion." He offered a small smile. "Call me Jake." "Jake," she repeated, her voice taking on a melodic quality that sent an unexpected shiver down his spine. "And I'm Iola." Back in his quarters, Jake submitted to the collection of biological samples by the outpost medical officer, Dr. Shumais, under the pretense of a routine health monitoring. The doctor raised an eyebrow at the unusual request, but asked no questions when Jake invoked security protocols. Ambassador Vyxan requested these for Federation compatibility standards. Jake explained, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably on his tongue. "Must be some new protocol." Dr. Shumais muttered as he labeled the samples. "Never had to do this for previous inspections." Jake shrugged non-committally. "Bureaucracy, Doc. Always changing the rules." After his shift ended, Jake found himself unable to sleep. His thoughts kept turning to Iola, her changing form, the strange connection their bodies seemed to share without their consent. He'd encountered numerous alien species during his military career, but never experienced anything like this primal chemical pull. A soft chime from his comm unit interrupted his thoughts. Iola's voice came through, sounding strained. "Jake, are you awake?" He sat up immediately. "I'm here. Everything okay?" "No," she admitted. "The changes are accelerating. My ship's physician has analyzed your samples alongside my biometric readings. The results are concerning." "I'll be right there," Jake said, already pulling on his uniform. When Eola opened her door, Jake nearly took a step back in shock. The transformation was dramatic. Her silver hair had developed iridescent highlights that seemed to shift color with her movements. Her emerald skin glowed with an inner luminescence, and her figure had become almost impossibly curvaceous, as if her body was doing everything possible to attract a mate. But it was her eyes that truly captured his attention. They had developed a hypnotic quality, with subtle patterns swirling in their blue depths. "Come in quickly," she urged, glancing nervously down the corridor. Inside her quarters, holographic data displays filled the air, showing complex molecular structures and comparative physiological scans. "My physician found something remarkable," Eola explained, gesturing to the displays. "Your pheromone profile contains a compound nearly identical to the primary mating trigger in Vyxan males. It shouldn't be possible. Our species evolved on planets light years apart." Jake studied the rotating molecular structures. Could it be convergent evolution? Similar environmental pressures creating similar solutions? Eola looked impressed. "You know your xenobiology, surgeon. 4 years stationed on frontier worlds teaches you a thing or two about alien life." He replied with a shrug. "So what does this mean for your condition?" Her expression grew serious. "It means my body is responding as if you were a compatible Vyxan mate. The cycle has fully activated, and it's progressing faster than normal." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "There are typically only 2 resolutions to a Vyxan mating cycle." "Which are?" Jake prompted when she fell silent. "Either the cycle completes naturally through intimate contact," she said delicately, "or it runs its course over approximately 2 weeks, during which time the symptoms become increasingly severe." Jake processed this information carefully. "And by severe, you mean?" "Elevated body temperature, increased heart rate, potential neurological effects including impaired judgment, and eventually, if left unresolved, possible organ failure." Her clinical tone couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. "My physician is concerned that the cross-species nature of this cycle may accelerate or worsen these effects." Jake ran a hand through his hair, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "There has to be another option. What about synthetic hormones or pheromones? My ship is working on it, but developing an effective treatment without proper facilities could take weeks." She gestured to her transformed body. "I don't have weeks, Jake." The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of biological imperative and professional boundaries neither wanted to cross. "We'll figure something out," Jake promised, though he had no idea how to fulfill that promise. "In the meantime, I should probably keep my distance to avoid making things worse." Eola nodded reluctantly. "That would be wise, though my physician believes the cycle is fully activated now. Your proximity may not significantly affect its progression at this point." As Jake turned to leave, the outpost alarm system suddenly blared to life. Red emergency lights bathed the room as Lieutenant Commander Bragg's voice came over the comm system. "All security personnel to battle stations. Skarn movement detected at the western perimeter." This is not a drill. Jake's military training kicked in immediately. "I have to go. Stay here, lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me." Eola straightened, her diplomatic poise reasserting itself despite her condition. "I'm not helpless, Sergeant. I've undergone Federation combat training. With all due respect, Ambassador, you're not exactly in optimal condition right now," Jake pointed out. A flash of determination crossed her face. "My condition doesn't negate my abilities. In fact," she paused, looking surprised, "I feel different. Stronger, more aware." Before Jake could argue further, his comm unit buzzed again with Briggs' voice. "Harrison, where the hell are you? We need you at the western gate now." "On my way," Jake responded, then turned back to Eola. "We'll continue this discussion after I deal with the Skarn." As he rushed toward the armory to don his exosuit, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the timing of this attack was far too convenient. The Skarn had been quiet for weeks, and now they chose to strike just as the outpost was hosting a Federation diplomat, one who was experiencing an unprecedented biological crisis. Something didn't add up, and Jake had a sinking feeling that the connection between these events would prove far more dangerous than either the Skarn raiders or Eola's mating cycle alone. Jake paced outside Eola's quarters, his mind racing. It had been 6 hours since he left her to rest, hoping distance might slow the progression of her condition. The outpost medical officer had no experience with Vyxan physiology, and Eola's ship remained unable to retrieve her due to the intensifying solar storm. His comm unit chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Shamais. "Sergeant, I've analyzed the ambassador's biometric readings. They're concerning. Her core temperature is rising, and her neurochemical levels are highly unstable. What does that mean in practical terms, Doc? Jake asked, already dreading the answer. It means her condition is accelerating, not stabilizing. Without intervention, the doctor hesitated. Organ failure becomes a possibility within 48 hours. Jake's stomach dropped. I'll check on her. When Iola's door slid open, the sight before him stole his breath. Her transformation had progressed dramatically. Her silver hair now had luminescent strands that seemed to float around her as if underwater. Her emerald skin glowed with an inner light, and the curves of her body had become even more pronounced. She stood by the viewport, silhouetted against the desert landscape, her figure radiating an otherworldly beauty. You shouldn't be here, she said without turning, her voice carrying a melodic resonance it hadn't possessed before. Your presence accelerates the changes. Dr. Shumei says you're getting worse, Jake replied, maintaining his distance. We need to talk about options. Iola turned, and Jake was struck by the intensity in her eyes, swirling patterns of blue and silver that seemed to capture the light. There are only two options, Jake. You know that. He did. Either she endured the cycle until it ran its course, potentially killing her, or they completed the biological imperative her body was demanding. My physician sent a detailed report, she continued, moving closer with a grace that seemed almost liquid. In Vyxan biology, the mating cycle isn't just about reproduction. It's about genetic exchange, adaptation, evolution. My body is preparing to bond with yours. Jake swallowed hard. And if we complete the cycle, the transformation stabilizes. The dangerous symptoms subside. Her eyes met his, but the changes to my form would be permanent. I would forever carry your genetic imprint. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Jake. That's a hell of a consequence for something neither of us chose. Iola's laugh was like wind chimes. Is it so terrible? Look at me, Jake. She gestured to her transformed body. My senses are heightened. I feel stronger, more alive than I've ever been. It's as though I'm becoming something my species was always meant to be. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. The question is whether you can accept the responsibility. Once done, this connection cannot be undone. In my culture, such a bond is sacred. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't deny the attraction he felt. It had been there from the moment she stepped off the shuttle, before any biological imperatives came into play. But this was more than attraction. It was life-altering for both of them. What about your position, your career? He asked. Those concerns seem trivial compared to survival, she replied. Besides, I'm not the first diplomat to form an unexpected bond during a mission. The Federation values adaptability. Her hand reached out, hovering just above his chest without touching. I can sense your heartbeat, your pheromones. Every cell in my body is attuned to you now. Jake took a deep breath, making his decision. If we do this, we do it right. Not just as a biological necessity, but with respect, with meaning. Iola's expression softened. That is very human of you, and very welcome. He took her hand, finally allowing himself the contact they'd both been avoiding. The sensation was electric. Her skin was warmer than a human's, with a supple texture like finest silk. I've never, she began, then paused. My species doesn't typically experience such intense attraction outside our own kind. It's overwhelming. For me too, Jake admitted. I feel drawn to you in ways I can't explain. Their fingers intertwined, and Jake felt a strange resonance between them, as if some ancient recognition was occurring at a cellular level. He drew her closer, their bodies finally meeting in an embrace that felt both alien and perfectly natural. Are you sure? He whispered against her silver hair. Her answer was to guide his hand to the pulse point at her throat, where he could feel her heartbeat racing in perfect synchronization with his own. Our bodies have already decided, Jake Harrison. Now our minds must follow. What followed was unlike anything Jake had experienced, a connection that transcended the physical, as if their very essences were communicating through touch and breath. Iola's transformed body responded to him with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural, her luminescent patterns flaring with each moment of connection. Time seemed to lose meaning as they explored this new territory between their species, discovering unexpected compatibilities and fascinating differences. Throughout, Jake was struck by the sense that something profound was happening, not just between them, but within them both. When they finally lay together in the aftermath, Iola's body had subtly changed again. The frantic energy that had been driving her transformation had calmed, replaced by a steady glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her breathing. "How do you feel?" Jake asked, tracing the luminescent patterns along her arm. "Balanced," she replied, her voice filled with wonder. "The fire that was consuming me has become controlled, purposeful." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him. "And you? Do you regret your choice?" Jake considered the question seriously. "No. Whatever this is between us, whatever we've started, it feels right. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Iola smiled, the patterns on her skin brightening in response to her emotions. "My people have an ancient belief that the universe sometimes creates souls in pairs, separated by vast distances but destined to find each other. That's a romantic thought for a species with such a practical approach to mating," Jake observed with a smile. "Perhaps we're not as different as we appear," she replied, settling against him. "Beneath our alien exteriors, we share more than either of our species has realized." As Iola drifted into a peaceful sleep for the first time since her transformation began, Jake remained awake, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. He had come to this remote outpost seeking solitude and purpose after years of military service. Instead, he had found an unexpected connection with a being from another world, a connection that seemed to awaken something dormant within himself. Outside, the desert winds howled against the outpost barriers, but within their sanctuary, a new kind of peace had been established. Whatever challenges awaited them, from the Federation, from the indigenous Skarn, or from their own transformed natures, they would face them together. Jake awoke to the gentle hum of the environmental systems and the soft glow emanating from Iola's transformed skin. The events of the previous night had changed everything between them, a connection forged through necessity that had somehow become something more profound. Iola stirred beside him, her luminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. Her eyes fluttered open, the swirling blue depths focusing on his face with newfound clarity. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice carrying that melodic resonance that had emerged during her transformation. "You're staring." Jake smiled, reaching out to trace one of the glowing patterns on her shoulder. "Hard not to. You're literally radiant." She captured his hand, examining it with curious intensity. "The changes have stabilized, I think. I feel balanced, centered in a way I haven't since arriving." Her gaze met his. "Thank you for what you did, for helping me through the cycle." "I think we helped each other," Jake replied, remembering the intensity of their connection. How it had transcended mere physical intimacy to become something neither of them fully understood. Iola sat up, the sheet falling away to reveal the elegant curves of her transformed body. The luminescent patterns flowed across her emerald skin like constellations, concentrating around her heart and extending outward along her limbs. "I need to examine the proxy samples," she announced suddenly. Jake blinked at the unexpected shift. "The mining samples? Why?" "Something's been nagging at me since yesterday." She rose gracefully, gathering her diplomatic attire. "The way my body responded to your pheromones, it shouldn't be possible. Our species evolved on planets light years apart. Maybe it's just one of those cosmic coincidences," Jake suggested, though he didn't quite believe it himself. Iola's expression turned thoughtful as she dressed. "In diplomacy, we learn there are rarely coincidences, only connections we haven't yet discovered." She gestured to her transformed figure. "This reaction, these changes, they feel purposeful, designed almost." Jake couldn't argue with that. The way her body had adapted, becoming more alluring yet also stronger, more resilient, it did seem like an evolutionary strategy rather than a random biological malfunction. After a quick breakfast in his quarters, they made their way to the research lab where samples of Proxy were stored for analysis before shipment. The facility was quieter than usual, with many personnel still repairing damage from the recent Skarn raid. Dr. Shemas looked up from his microscope as they entered, his eyes widening at Iola's transformed appearance in the harsh laboratory lighting. "Ambassador, Surgeon, how can I help you?" "I need to examine your proxy samples," Iola stated, her diplomatic authority evident despite her altered state, particularly any unrefined specimens. Shemas hesitated, glancing at Jake. "That requires authorization from—" "Consider it given," Jake interrupted. After their intimate connection, he trusted Iola's instincts implicitly. Federation inspection protocols grant the ambassador access to all materials being extracted. The doctor nodded reluctantly, leading them to a sealed containment unit. Inside, raw chunks of Proxy glowed with a pulsing blue-green light, not unlike the patterns now adorning Iola's skin. As Shumis activated the scanning equipment, Jake noticed Aula's intense focus on the mineral samples. Her transformed eyes seemed to perceive something beyond the visible spectrum, and the luminescent patterns on her skin brightened in response to the proxy's proximity. Remarkable, she whispered, leaning closer to the containment field. It's resonating at a quantum level with my biological signature. That's impossible, Shamai subjected. Proxy is inert until processed for FTL drives. Apparently not, Eola countered, her fingers hovering just above the containment field. May I? Before Shamas could protest, Jake nodded his approval. The doctor reluctantly deactivated the field, allowing Eola to carefully lift a small fragment of the raw mineral. The reaction was immediate and stunning. The proxy's glow intensified, matching the pulse of the patterns on Eola's skin. The fragment seemed to liquefy partially in her palm, tendrils of luminescent energy extending toward her fingers before retracting. It's responding to you, Jake observed, amazed. Not just responding, communicating, Eola corrected, her voice filled with wonder. This isn't merely a mineral, it's semi-organic, possibly sentient on some basic level. Shemai's scientific skepticism was evident. That contradicts everything we know about Proxy. Everything you know, Eola clarified. The Federation has suspected unusual properties in certain rare elements for decades, but this, she carefully returned the fragment to the containment unit. This suggests something far more significant. Before she could elaborate, Jake's comm unit chimed with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was unfamiliar, female, and distinctly Vyxan. Outpost Dune, this is Captain Thella of the Federation vessel Astral Harmony. We've broken through the solar interference and request immediate communication with Ambassador Vyxan. Jake exchanged glances with Eola, whose expression had grown suddenly guarded. Your ship made it through the storm. So it seems, she replied, her tone neutral but her eyes conveying concern. They moved to the communication center, where Lieutenant Donovan had already established a secure channel with the Vyxan vessel. The holographic display activated, revealing a stern-faced female Vyxan in Federation uniform. Ambassador Vyxan, we've been attempting to. Captain Thella's formal greeting died on her lips as she registered Eola's transformed appearance. By the Celestial Council, what's happened to you? Eola straightened, her diplomatic poise asserting itself despite her altered state. A biological response to local conditions, Captain. Nothing to be concerned about. The captain's expression suggested she found plenty to be concerned about. Our sensors detected anomalous energy readings from your location. The Council has ordered your immediate retrieval for medical evaluation. Jake felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. After what they'd shared, the thought of Eola leaving was unexpectedly painful. I'm in the middle of a critical inspection, Eola countered smoothly. The situation at this outpost is more complex than initially reported. I've discovered potentially groundbreaking information about Proxy that requires further investigation. Captain Thella's expression hardened. With respect, Ambassador, your physical condition suggests you may be compromised. The Council is concerned about your judgment under these unusual circumstances. Jake stepped forward, unable to remain silent. Ambassador Vyxan has conducted herself with complete professionalism throughout this crisis. Her insights about the Proxy could revolutionize our understanding of the resource. The captain's gaze shifted to Jake, assessing him with cool efficiency. And you are? Staff Sergeant Jake Harrison, Security Chief. Something in the captain's expression changed, a flash of understanding that made Jake uneasy. I see. Ambassador, we will be docking within the hour. Prepare for immediate departure. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the communication center. They can't just order you to leave, Jake said finally. You're a senior diplomat. Eola's luminescent patterns had dimmed slightly, reflecting her concern. They can if they believe I'm medically compromised, and from their perspective I am. She gestured to her transformed body. No Vyxan has ever undergone changes like these before. What about the Proxy? Your discovery. That's precisely why I need to stay, she agreed, her resolve strengthening. There's a connection here, between the Proxy, my transformation, and possibly even the Skarn. Something ancient and important that we're just beginning to understand. Jake took her hand, the luminescent patterns brightening at his touch. Then we'll find a way to convince them, together. Eola's eyes met his, the swirling depths reflecting both determination and something deeper that had grown between them. Together, she echoed, squeezing his hand. As they prepared to face the arriving Federation vessel, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their connection, forged through biological necessity and deepened through intimate understanding, was about to be tested in ways neither of them could anticipate. The Federation vessel Astral Harmony docked with Outpost Dune precisely on schedule, its sleek hull gleaming under the harsh desert sun. Jake and Iola waited in the docking bay, an unspoken tension between them. Since their intimate connection, Jake had noticed subtle changes in himself as well: heightened senses, quicker reflexes, and most strangely, occasional flashes of awareness that seemed to extend beyond his physical body. "Remember," Iola murmured as the airlock cycled, "reveal nothing about our personal connection. Captain Thella is known for her strict adherence to protocol." Jake nodded, though the thought of denying what had grown between them left a bitter taste in his mouth. "And the proxy?" "I'll handle that diplomatically," she replied, her luminescent patterns dimming slightly as she composed herself. The airlock hissed open, and Captain Thella emerged, flanked by 2 Vyxan security officers and a medical specialist. The captain's eyes widened momentarily at Iola's transformed appearance before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Ambassador Vyxan," she greeted formally. "The Council is most concerned about your condition." "My condition is stable, Captain," Iola responded with equal formality, "and has yielded unexpected insights into the properties of proxy that warrant immediate investigation." Thella's gaze flicked briefly to Jake before returning to Iola. "We can discuss your findings aboard the Harmony. Dr. Merritt needs to conduct a full medical evaluation." The medical specialist stepped forward, scanning device already humming in his hand. As the beam passed over Iola, his professional demeanor faltered. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "Your cellular structure is reorganizing at the quantum level. These patterns," he gestured to the luminescent markings on her skin, "they're not decorative. They're functional." "Functional how?" Jake asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Dr. Merritt seemed to notice him for the first time. "They appear to be channeling energy throughout her system, similar to neural pathways, but operating on principles I don't fully understand." His eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Staff Surgeon Harrison," Thella answered before Jake could speak. "The security chief who's been assisting the ambassador during her stay." Something in her tone made Jake uneasy. "Ambassador Vyxan has made a significant discovery regarding proxy," Jake interjected. "Before she leaves, I believe the Federation would want a full demonstration of its properties."